House do now adjourn. Dame Harriett Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and what a pleasure it is to see you in the chair. I want to thank the Speaker for allocating me one of the earliest adjournment debates in this new Parliament. And what a pleasure you've had this afternoon, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be able to listen to such an excellent array of maiden speeches. My speech is going to be more of a reiteration of some points and less of a novelty, Madam Deputy Speaker, because in fact, at the beginning of the last Parliament, I also was lucky enough to get an adjournment debate, and it was on the subject of these same flood defences that I'm going to elaborate on in a moment. In the last Parliament, we not only had coronavirus at the beginning, but we also suffered in that winter from storms Clara and Dennis. And I'd also like, Madam Deputy Speaker, to congratulate the Flood Minister on her appointment. She and I were colleagues on the Treasury Select Committee. I know how passionately and genuine she cares about flooding issues, and so I look forward to working with her from a part of the world that is also frequently flooded. In West Worcestershire, we realise that we will flood a lot. We have the River Severn running through the middle of West Worcestershire, we have the River Avon, and we have the River Team, which flows into the River Severn just south of Worcester. And so we accept that flooding is a part of nature. Flooding is a part of what we have in West Worcestershire. But what I've tried to do in the years that I have been fortunate enough to represent the area in Parliament and before is to try and mitigate some of the problems that do arise from being in a very flood-prone part of the world. And last winter we saw again how difficult it can be when you have a very wet winter, and we had many local farmers, residents and businesses who were very grateful for funding from the Flood Recovery Fund after storms Babette and Henk. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. Rural areas are often worst impacted by flood damage, yet they are often deemed less of a priority for flood defences than urban areas. So does the Honourable Member agree that the flood defence grant in aid cost benefit analysis must be reviewed to ensure that it sufficiently values agricultural and rural communities?
The Honourable Lady highlights something that I have grappled with throughout my time as Member of Parliament, and I'm going to move on to the situation in Tenbury Wells in my constituency. I will give way to the Honourable Gentleman in a moment. I want to make a bit of progress because 17 years ago this month, in the middle of summer, we had the most severe flooding for many, many years. It caused massive damage and misery across West Worcestershire. And in fact, it was the Right Honourable Member for Leeds South who was the Environment Minister at the time, and he came in 2007 to see the devastation in Tenbury Wells. And it was at that time that I first started to look into these cost-benefit analyses and the formula that the Honourable Lady raises. So, while accepting that in West Worcestershire we will flood regularly, I think there are many things that we can do to mitigate the misery of being flooded and being flooded regularly. I give way.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I congratulate you, Honourable Lady, on being elevated to the Deputy Chair. Well deserved and well respected, and everyone in this House is very, very encouraged to see you in that position. Can I first of all, or secondly, congratulate the Honourable Lady for West Worcestershire for bringing this forward. And is the Right Honourable Lady aware that inadequate flood defences mean an increase in homeowners' insurance premiums? They also increase, and that's been noted, and I think in the Right Honourable Lady's constituency, as it is in mine of Strangford. And does the Right Honourable Lady agree that this House and Government must work on a UK-wide approach to ensuring that insurance premiums aren't hiked because defences are inadequate? Thank you.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman raises a very important point, and it was indeed after these 2007 floods that the idea of a flood reinsurance scheme came about, and I was glad that when the government came in 2010 that it was something that was established, and it has become somewhat easier to get insurance, but it's also, and I'm going to highlight some examples in my speech, continues to be a challenge, and it will be interesting to hear if the Minister from the dispatch box can confirm whether flood re is going to continue to be a priority of the new government. I've campaigned successfully for many flood defence schemes in West Worcestershire over the years. We have made real progress. In particular, the two schemes that protect Upton upon Severn now have been deployed year in, year out. In fact, they've successfully protected Upton upon Severn from flooding something like 40 times since they were opened in 2013, I think it was. And we've had a bund built along the Defford Road in Pershore. We've had a flood defence gate installed in Kemsey. We've had a gate barrier installed in Uckinghall, a bund built in Powick, and a community scheme is now in place in Callowen. So there's been real progress. And you saw the cumulative impact of the many millions that have been spent on flood defences across West Worcestershire, in the resilience that the communities showed last winter when it was so very, very wet. And I'd like to take this opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker, to put on record my thanks to previous flood ministers, to the teams at the Environment Agency, to Worcestershire County Council and to the regional flood defence committees who've helped over time to get these flood defence schemes funded and built.
Would you give way?
I give way.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to have her giving way. And she describes a huge amount of investment that's been going into the River Severn. And she has an awful lot of the River Severn, and she'll be aware that in Bewdley, we've got about £11 million being spent getting Bewdley done against flood defences. But she may remember that our former colleague, the member for Shrewsbury, recognised that the whole of the River Severn is a cohesive watercourse, and that actually it needs a lot of effort to get the whole thing right. And he set up an action group looking at this. That role now is vacant, and I was wondering if the honourable member would be enthusiastic to take it on, because she would have a lot of support from all of those members of Parliament on what used to be the Blue River Severn, but I think it's a little bit red in places and a bit orange in places.
I thought my honourable gentleman made a good pitch for him to take on that role. It was I certainly support him, but he is right that all of us who live along the Severn catchment and the rivers that flow into the Severn have a responsibility to work together to make sure that we make progress. With the very wet weather that we had this winter, we also discovered that some of the roads that we kind of accept will close once or twice a year are now closing more frequently, and so I've asked for analysis from both our County Council and the Environment Agency to explore the projections of the frequency with which those closures might happen. And I'm looking to find a solution to the situation with the Hanley Road outside Upton upon Severn, but also the historic Eckington Bridge where the floodplain is flooding more frequently. We do need to see whether we need solutions to these infrastructure challenges over the next decades to come. I now want to turn to two schemes, Madam Deputy Speaker, that are still not built. And they were the subject of my adjournment debate back in 2020. Does the Honourable Gentleman want to intervene on me? Yes.
Thank you, Honourable Lady, for giving way. And just before she moves on to the next 2 points, I just want to touch on the point about the impact on local people. And I wonder whether she would join me in being very concerned at the proposals from the Conservative on Newcastle and Lyme Borough Council to build on Kill Golf Course, which is many of my constituents very concerned indeed about the potential impact of flooding that may come with such development. And so will she agree with me that when it comes to building, councils have to factor in the climate and our natural world?
Well, look, I think he needs to have a word with his Deputy Prime Minister about that, because I think he and I may share some concerns about the ability of Whitehall to determine where the concrete is poured across our country. I think, though, that in terms of these two schemes that I want to turn to, that we can make progress in this Parliament on Tenbury Wells and Severn Stokes flood defence schemes. I would like the Minister to be the Minister who sees these schemes completed. Tenbury Wells is the most beautiful town, but it is built on a floodplain, and it was built on a floodplain centuries ago. And so to protect it is a very complicated project. It comprises floodgates, bunds, walls. And after my adjournment debate in 2020, to my delight, a funded scheme was agreed. £4.9 million was allocated to move the scheme forward. And on top of this, last year, I secured another £2.5 million from the Frequently Flooded Communities Fund because inflation had taken its toll and construction costs had spiralled. Now we're in a situation where some of those millions have been spent on consultants and on advisors, but the flood defence scheme itself is still stuck on the drawing board and hasn't yet gone to planning. And so I'm going to ask the Minister for an update on that, if I may, when she replies. And then Severn Stoke, the clue is in the name, it's another community that sits on a floodplain. And the village, its popular pub, its church and the busy A38 road are frequently flooded. In fact, the village hall had to be pulled down because the parish could no longer afford to insure the property. The church is now struggling with insurance. In the last Parliament, I was pleased to win funding for this scheme as well, including from the Frequently Flooded Communities Fund, and arranged the transport of local topsoil to the place free of charge. But I would also describe that scheme now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as stalled. And in fact, there is a forlorn pile of topsoil in Severn Stoke that sat there again while the village flooded again last winter. And so I would like the Minister to tell me how we can get both these schemes moving again, and importantly, how we get them finished. In April, I had a very helpful meeting with the Environment Agency Chief Executive Philip Duffy and the Environment Agency team, and I had another one scheduled for June, but of course the general election intervened. Can I start by asking the Minister if we can reschedule that meeting at the earliest moment to identify how to unblock these two schemes? I know that the last government was on track to spend over £5 billion on flood defences over the spending review period. With pleasure.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way, who's giving an excellent speech and makes the case very strongly as to why we need to be investing in flood defence schemes. Does my honourable friend agree with me that under the last Conservative administration we increased the amount of investment for flood defence schemes from £2.6 billion to £5.2 billion over the next 6-year period? Does my honourable friend agree with me that the new government should adhere to those funding increases, and so that we can make sure that schemes like the ones that she is advocating are dealt with and funded?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his intervention? He points to the fact that I acknowledge, which is that cumulatively we have become more resilient to flooding in West Worcestershire over the last 14 years. But there are these two schemes, and that is going to be my next question to the Minister when she replies, which is, can she confirm that the new government will continue with the same level of spending envelope that my honourable friend mentioned? Is there anything I could do other than holding debates such as this and meeting with the Chief Executive of the Environment Agency that would help locally to unblock any of the issues? I know that this is a complicated scheme, particularly the one in Tenbury Wells, and I just want to see a way for the Environment Agency to find its way through those obstacles. The local community does know that in order to make the omelette that is the flood defences of Tenbury Wells, there will have to be a few eggs broken with a few road closures at times and potentially some loss of road space down some side roads. And so I think I just want to speak on behalf of the community that they're prepared to put up with that level of inconvenience and some traffic disruption for a while in order to protect their beautiful town. Because it can be seen in West Worcestershire that the other examples I've mentioned, particularly Upton upon Severn, the long-term benefit of protecting the town is immeasurably huge. So will the Minister, when she responds to this debate, join me in our shared persistence and shared determination to protect these two communities, get these two schemes finally built, preferably before the next serious floods inevitably arrive? And finally, can she confirm she is to press ahead with the expanded offer of the Farming Recovery Fund, because farmers in my constituency and elsewhere think it's very important that the offer includes not just those who experience damage due to extreme rainfall and not just flooded land. And I have given way already once to the honourable lady, and I'm going to allow the Minister to use the rest of the time, if I may, to respond.
Minister Emma Hardy.
Thank you very much, and congratulations, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is tonight a situational first. I am giving my first speech as Minister. We have the Madam Deputy Speaker here for the first time, but we have the continuity, of course, of the honourable friend, the member from Strangford, to intervene in the adjournment debate. So as so many things change, we see so many things still remain the same, and long may that continue. And I am equally delighted to be responding on my first debate to the Right Honourable Member for West Worcestershire, who I hold in high regard and esteem, and enjoyed our time together on the Treasury Select Committee. And I'm pleased that it was actually the first debate in which I get to respond to talk to about something in which we had conversations about before I took this role. And I just want to state from the beginning, I am very happy to continue this conversation. I recognise she requested a meeting, more than happy to follow that up. Because, as she has alluded to, we remember 2007 very well. I mean, she talked about the challenge that it faced on her constituency and the impact it had, and indeed, it was the same for myself, representing Hull. Absolutely devastating, and that continued trauma is felt by people every time they experience something again. And as the Right Honourable Member has mentioned, that continued and repeated trauma has a long-lasting impact, not just on the economy, not just on the state of your property, but also on people's mental health as well. And I want to make it therefore abundantly clear that this government is committed more than ever to protect communities from flooding, and it is one of our top 5 priorities in DEFRA, and the good news is the work has already begun. Now, I want to be as open and honest with the Right Honourable Member as I possibly can be. So I've looked in detail at the 2 schemes that I was aware she was raising tonight. And although, of course, the Environment Agency, I've been informed, has completed some work since 2007 and progress has been made, which I'm sure we both want to acknowledge, these 2 schemes do seem to be particularly difficult. And I recognise as well that she raised this with the previous Minister about the same issue. And I want to extend my sympathies to all of the communities of West Worcestershire who are affected by the winter flooding. It is an awful thing for anyone to experience, and I enjoy and share her persistence. In fact, I believe this place only works when we have persistent, and can I say persistent and talented women leading the way here. So absolutely with you on that. Now, turning first to the Severn Stoke scheme, flood alleviation scheme. So I understand the Right Honourable Member was involved in securing some of the soil required for the embankment. Now, my understanding of this situation at the moment is if it is completed, of course, it will better protect 18 homes and businesses and the Rose and Crown pub, which I've heard good things about. But the difficulty seems to be at the moment in making sure that the scheme comes in within the funding envelope that's been allocated. Now, my understanding of this, and I will make a comment on the funding formula, is that the benefits of the scheme as assessed cannot be greater than the cost of the scheme to deliver. So the funding envelope that's been allocated is based on the benefit that's meant to be given. Therefore, it has to be delivered within that envelope, even though the payment in kind has been received by providing the soil. So that's the difficulty that there is with this particular scheme. Now, the good news is the Environment Agency are still working on finding a contractor, are still sort of going out there and talking to organisations that could perform that role to deliver it within the budget available. And the Right Honourable Member mentioned about the role that she could play within this. I mean, obviously, she will have knowledge and experience of businesses in her local area, and I'm sure that any contractor out there knowing what benefits they would be bringing to the city and how much they would be celebrated for doing so might be an avenue to talk about making sure they can deliver it within the funding given. So that's the particular difficulty with that one, as I understand it, and which I completely recognise the frustration. There must be nothing more frustrating than, I think, to use the word she described, a forlorn pile of soil sitting there doing nothing. So I share that frustration, and I hope that we can find that contractor needed. Now, on the Tenbury Wells one, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Does the Minister agree with me that the reason that so many of the flood schemes have not been completed, and I include in that a number in my own constituency of Carlisle, is as a direct result of the economic chaos of the last government, which has forced the Environment Agency to cancel a quarter of the planned flood schemes?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and it's great to see her here this evening. And she's absolutely right. I mean, the economic chaos that we face, the chaos in continuing changing governments, in prime ministers, in chancellors, has not given the stability that the country has needed to get on with these schemes delivered. We now have that change that people required. We have the stability. We have the ministers here. I'm hopefully not going anywhere quickly. So I'm hoping we can get on and deliver. And I like to see her persistence as well in raising this issue, and I hope she will continue to pursue it. But the Tenbury's Wells scheme that the Right Honourable Lady mentioned, I had a really careful look into this and looked into quite how complicated this would actually be. And as she alluded to in her speech, this involves potentially people having to move house, having to remove parts of gardens at a time, closing roads at part of a time. And my understanding of the situation is as the necessary consultation has been done with residents in the detail needed, because nobody wants a scheme that's going to be disruptive and expensive and not perform in the way it has. And it also has to be in keeping with the beautiful part of the country in which we're talking about here. It has meant that the design costs have increased and increased and increased. And there's always a difficulty with anything that you want it to be the best possible thing it can be in terms of delivering the flood alleviation, but it has to be designed in the best possible way that's in keeping with the character of the town that causes as minimum disruption as possible. So my understanding of the situation as it stands right now is this has become much more expensive as time has gone on, and that's maybe one of the schemes that we might want to talk about in more detail when we have our meeting, because it's important that we get it right, but it's important that it's also affordable within the money that's been allocated. And so that's a conversation I'm very happy to sort of take forward and look at, because I wouldn't want to be the minister for delivering something that residents wouldn't want to see and wouldn't want to have in their own community. And as has been alluded to, the Right Honourable Member will know from the National Audit Office Resilience to Flooding report published last November, we've inherited a floods capital programme that is facing extreme delivery challenges. I mean, the NAO, as has been mentioned, has mentioned a number of projects that have been able to go through, partly because they've not been able to be delivered within the time frame, partly because of inflation, and partly because of COVID and various other challenges within government. And this has had an impact. So I'm currently reviewing absolutely everything that's going on at the moment within the Environment Agency, looking at all of the schemes, and I want to be able to update honourable members on all of these as quickly as possible. And of course, welcome, if anybody wishes to see me about individual schemes, they're more than welcome.
I'm very grateful for the Minister for giving way, and can I congratulate her on her new job, and she's doing a fantastic job so far, and saying all the right things that I want to hear as a neighbour. She talked about reviewing how all of this is done, and I think there's no harm in doing that. I think we'd all agree with that. And, but I think it's probably worth bringing up my experience just down the river from Tenbury Wells in Bewdley, where we are seeing this being done very, very successfully, and it's working very well, and it's working with the town and the community. However, there's one issue which does keep coming up, and the disruption of having to close the bridge for one-way traffic does result in a slight drop-off in trade within the town. And I was wondering, it's very, very early days for her, but as part of this review, it might be very helpful to reassure city traders that if her department could look at the possibility of some kind of, not necessarily financial compensation, but something that can help businesses that struggle with cash flow during very lean periods because of the works, that can get them through. Because we do know that ultimately you get far, far better economic value out of a town that does have flood defence because it doesn't flood anymore. But in the interim, it's problematic. And if I could ask her respectfully if she could have a look at that as part of her review, so that we can see how we can help traders get over the hump, which is that difficult moment as we're going through the flood defence works.
And I thank him for his intervention and kind words, and I do recognise the difficulty it has on businesses, and I think this goes to the point I made to the Right Honourable Lady before. This is why the design has to be right, and why it has to be done in conjunction with the community, and this is sometimes why things become more expensive. But I'll take away the point that he's made. And on the issue of the funding formula, I've said in opposition many times that I was keen to look under the bonnet, and now I'm very delighted I get that chance to look very detailed under the bonnet at exactly how it works. And so that's something I'm sort of reviewing at the moment. I mean, as with any formula, of course, if you pull one lever, it can have unintended consequences elsewhere. So I hope you'll forgive me for not giving in detail exactly which levers I intend to pull. But I think having a clear and transparent understanding about how this works, and from the formula that we have, who are the winners, who are the losers, and what kind of priorities do we want to have, is something that I'm actively going through at this moment, of course.
Thank the Minister. Minister, in my intervention on the Right Honourable Lady, I referred to the insurance premiums. If we sort the flooding out, insurance premiums will fall, less cost. That has to be a factor when it comes to the constituents in relation to the cost they have for living. Is it something the Minister would look at, please? Thank you.
And I thank my honourable friend for his second intervention in an adjournment debate, so we are doing well. I think the flood re-scheme is something I've been passionately supportive of. Obviously, we have 2039 when it's meant to come to an end. And again, this is something I'm looking at in real detail to see, because what I want to ensure is the whole point of the flood re-scheme was that we would be able to build resilient properties that wouldn't therefore be reliant on it. That hasn't happened. I think we need a level of honesty about that. So I'm looking at that flood re-scheme at the moment, because what we want to ensure that is wherever people live within the United Kingdom, they're able to find affordable insurance for their property, and that has to be a priority. And one of the other big problems that we face in the last few minutes I've got is the maintenance of existing flood defences. We're talking a lot here about the Capitol building and the need to build new flood defences, but we have a significant problem with the flood defences that we already have. This has been exacerbated by the problems that we've had with the two storms, and that is one of my big concerns at the moment, is the deterioration we've seen over the past few years of some of our key infrastructure. So that's another priority for me. In opposition, I talked about our flood resilience task force and what Labour will do, and I'm pleased to say Labour are getting on with it, as promised, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we will be looking to create this as soon as possible ahead of the wettest season. This flood resilience task force will look at coordination across government and across agencies on the ground, including working with stakeholders in fire and rescue services to inform policy and establish national standards. Because one of the difficulties I notice very often in opposition is the problems we had with different governmental departments maybe not always working together as one when they should. So to finish, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government is dedicated to collaborating closely with the Environment Agency and, of course, the Right Honourable Member to advance the Severn, Stoke and Tenbury well scheme in the constituency of West Worcestershire. But more generally, this government commits that work will ensure communities throughout England receive the protection they need, especially as the risk of flooding rises due to climate change. And I salute her and every other member here's persistence on this matter.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order.